All right. Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, the 23rd of April, 2024. We're here in the loft before the 5:30 class gets underway. I thought I would do a little, an episode that's been a long way in the making here. So with me today is Frayne, and he's one of our coaches here at the box. And when I got the idea of starting a podcast, I asked a few people. One of the things I've noticed, I guess, you try to get opinions on something. If you ask too many people, you're never going to do it. Because you ask too many people, you will talk yourself in a complete 360 right back to not going to do it. But I only asked a few people whose opinions I felt, I wanted. And I thought one of the funny things when I asked you, you were like, yeah, I think it's a good idea. But, and I'm like, oh man, but what? And you were like, but I'd like to hear your other stories. So that's why we're here. That's why we're here today. So fire away.
Okay. Well, I know I've heard of many of your stories, segments. So I'm thinking here about getting the from point A to point B, the beginning to the end, or
Right.
at least let's say the end, or at least the current day, because there may be more.
I hope
depending
so.
on how the world goes. So I know you were in contracting, but let's just get a background of how you ended up
Sure.
as a contractor.
So I did my undergrad at Pitt, right here in Pittsburgh. And probably from freshman year in high school, I had my sights set on law school. And I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a lawyer. And as a kid, I didn't even have these I'm going to be a cowboy or I'm going to be a policeman or I didn't keep changing. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I just, and neither did I wear little suits on the playground and say I'm going to be a lawyer. I just, by the time I was a freshman, one of my cousins is a very successful attorney. And I just thought, I thought that was something that I could do, that I would be pretty good at. And freshman year in high school, my sights were set on that. Freshman year in college, same thing. I even, not having a dedicated pre-law curriculum, I was like, well, find something broad-based, versatile, but potentially useful. So I majored in psychology, which I thought would give me a little bit more insight, and a good broad-based education. And it was probably my sophomore year in college. I don't know what the draw was. I mean, if this was San Diego or Virginia Beach, I would understand the draw to the Navy. But it's Pittsburgh. I mean, it's not. We got rivers, We've got rivers. We don't have the ocean. But there was just something about the Navy just started to draw me. And I will never forget that conversation with my mom and dad. It did not go well. I did not go. My father was a police officer. He had served in the Korean War. And, it was an interesting character because only when I was a lot older and had been around, he shared with me, he's like, one of the things that used to always rub me the wrong way, he was like, I'd run into guys over the years. Oh, I was in Korea. And my dad was like, oh, cool. He'd never talk about it. He's like, all right. Yeah, where were you? Where were you stationed? And my dad's like, Korea. And he'd give a couple different locations where he had been, but he was in armored division. He was in tanks, and he had been in a few major battles. And as he described them, and again, this wasn't as a kid, because I think looking back, there was nothing to tell a kid, And when he shared it with me later on, because I brought it up, I was like, man, a couple times I'd have a sit down with him when I was home, and I'm like, Dad, had you ever seen anything like this? And, we would kind of trade stories, and it was much more conventional on his end, but, he had been in it. And he was dry too, he had a good sense of humor, but he'd go, yeah, he goes, really rubbed me the wrong way. The guy would be like, oh yeah, I was in Korea. And I'd say, oh yeah, right. Well, where were you? Germany. Oh, okay. So you were on active duty during the Korean conflict. But your unit was stationed in, which is nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I guess, from Dad's perspective, was more like, yeah, I know where I've been and what I did and the losses and whatnot. I need to reminisce over that, I really, really thought he would have more of an understanding. Oh, no. No, it was the exact opposite. I mean, he was, yeah, I don't think I ever pissed him off that badly.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
he was like upset. He thought it was the worst decision that I could have possibly made. And I was like, wow, Dad, sophomore year, I never didn't bring it up again. All right. So graduated, and then I started the process for officer candidate school. And again, not knowing anything about the recruiting process. And this was before the internet. So you couldn't get on and go, what programs are available and how should I do this, this, this. It was all done through the recruiters. And I don't know how they are today. Well, that's not true. I've actually helped a couple guys through different pipelines that they were interested in. And I was very fortunate to be in a position that I could reach out just recently. Two young men that I was friends with. Well, one was the boyfriend of a classmate of my daughter in college, right? Was working on a SEAL contract for the Navy. I was very pleased that I was able to put him in touch with a good friend of mine who is a retired SEAL team member. Another guy, a dear friend of ours, Matt. I don't know if you remember him. He trained with us for a while. The guy's a beast. I mean, he is. I don't like to name, last names. I think it's bad form, particularly because you never know how somebody's going to, take it. I don't mean the person I'm talking about because he's a good guy. But anyway, we were moving from one gym to another, right? I think from our last one to this one. And we had his pickup truck. We had my truck. I don't remember who was with us, but there was a third player. So two of us were up here. Matt looks at me and he goes, and I know this is a divergence, but this is the mindset. This is, he said, hey, what else he's like, I don't have a whole lot of time today. He's like, what else can I bring up? And I was like, well, I'll tell you what. I said, now we didn't get that. The rubber flooring we have now, those panels,
Yep.
we didn't get that until we were here. At the old space, we had the rolled rubber.
Okay.
And I don't remember the thickness, but it's heavy. I mean, it's rolled, so if you take the weight per square foot or yard or whatever, and you roll that up, it's exponential, right? And I said, you know what? I said, if you don't mind, why don't you go back and grab some of the plyo boxes? I said, I've got to bring, he goes, well, what all needs to be brought up? And I was like, well, actually, Matt, everything. But for right now, I'm thinking 2-man, 3-man, 1-man. I was like, you know what? I said, we'll have to worry about that another day. I said, if you just go grab the boxes, that'll be a big help. He's like, check. Out the door he goes. He's gone for a while. And this kid is no slacker. I mean, he's like first one done with the workout, first one to show up to help. I'm like, man, I hope nothing happened. Like what could happen? But I hope nothing did, right? Next thing you know, I hear a vehicle pull up outside. He comes walking through the door, and we're like, hey, man, you okay? He goes, yeah. He's like, you want to help me unload? We said, sure. We walk out, and the boxes are in the truck, but they're all stacked on top of rolled rubber. And I'm like, how did you get that? And I'm wondering, did somebody happen by? Because that, it was on Washington Boulevard.
Right.
People would drive by all the time. Some of them members of, oh, hey, I saw the door open, thought I'd give you a hand. People we knew or members of ours or whatever. And he's like, no. But now he's like so matter of fact. He goes, well, the smaller one. Now, smaller ones weren't small, right? He goes, oh, the smaller ones weren't that bad. He's like, I made a workout out of it. He rolled them up and basically like snatched them, carried them to the truck and set them down. I think he might have used like Gorilla Tape to keep them from unraveling.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, the big one was a bitch. I'm like, I'll bet. Yeah. He took some nylon rigging that I had sewn together to drag the sleds. Yeah, and he devised like a sling on both ends, like he looped it on both ends. And then he stood like so, and then basically lifted it up, spun it around, and hoisted it up to his back and carried it out the door. He was a bull. He still is. But he was working so hard on a BUDS contract, and same thing. I was able to reach out to the same friend of mine, put him in touch. He actually did get the BUDS contract, and just sailed through boot camp at Great Lakes, and then he was in like a holding company waiting pre-BUDS. And he called me. I'll never forget this. He calls me one day, and he's just really, really out of it. And he's like, man, he goes, I went to medical today. And he's like, they first they thought like he had a deep abdominal tear, and then they thought he had a double hernia, and then and again, it was one of those things that was so. I said, well, okay, well, I said, what happened? And he was like, well, they're asking me if I want something else, and I'm like, what did you tell them? He's like, well, I didn't tell them anything yet. I was like, okay, thank God, right? And I'm like, listen, long story short, due to all sorts of ins and outs, he was medically discharged, and then he's a good guy, unstoppable, and he went and I think it's a guard unit, an Army National Guard unit. So he stayed in the system, but that kind of thing to me, like I didn't have that back then. Probably makes me more like maniacal about helping people now if they want it.
Interesting.
But it took my dad a little while. Like, it wasn't like he stopped talking to me or disowned me or anything like that. But he was not happy. So I finished my undergrad, and he had a construction company at the time. So I worked for him for a while I was processing, with the Navy. And I'll never forget, waiting and waiting and waiting. And the tests went fine, the physical tests, the written exams and all that. And the next thing I know...
So you have exams for entrance into the Navy? So I'm as a complete civilian in this.
I got you. I got you.
Obvious questions. So
sure.
So your dad was not pleased with you joining the Navy.
Correct.
Was he in the Army?
He was.
Okay.
Oh no, it wasn't one of those. It wasn't. It was not.
I gotta ask. And you sort of alluded to it already, but random. So the Navy, what was there anything? We're in Pittsburgh, like you said. This is interesting. I just
right.
was curious.
Right. Well, this is where it gets this way. So so do I. I mean, I do. Born and raised born and raised in Pittsburgh. Might as well be Iowa. I mean, you have probably more water there, but I didn't know very much at all about the SEALs. Didn't know much about them at all, other than it was maybe that was most of the allure was didn't know anything about them. Very, very unknown at that time. This is like the mid 80s, like 85, 86, and I just really felt like, to me, I always liked to test myself. And I'm sure everybody says that at some point. But I was like, okay, you want to talk about the unknown and the unknowable. I don't know anything other than it is extremely hard. They're waterborne commandos. And this is, and any books I could get. At the time, there was, it was SEAL Team 1 was the book, was a paperback. And I read that probably like 3 times, but the stories back then were all more focused on like Vietnam era and riverine warfare and that type of thing. So, really that was my focus. That was my primary focus, but not knowing anything about the community. Now, special warfare is its own line. Right? Back then it wasn't. It was all voluntary, right? But back then, you, as an enlisted sailor, you had to have a rate. So, bosun's mate, torpedoman, whatever your specialty was. Officers, largely officers came from surface warfare. You would do a tour, you'd get your warfare device, and then you would volunteer for BUDS if you were selected. You would go through, and if you made it, you're welcome to the teams, right? So here I am, like, I don't know any of this. And my recruiter, and I don't, again, I don't know if he sold me a bad bill of goods or maybe he did. Listen, I have no regrets. I really don't. Well, anyway, we test and apply. And we tried every, surface warfare, that's the biggest line in the Navy. Unrestricted line officer, surface warfare is huge. There were 0 vacancies in that fiscal year, that time frame. So I was like, okay, great. So what are my other options? Well, you can apply for. I think I did surface warfare, naval intelligence. I don't know. You're supposed to pick 3. I might have only picked 2. I don't know. Didn't get it. So I'm at work one day, and one of the interesting little things, you can retest, and I passed every time. I mean, better and better. Like my PT scores they started off good and they just got better and better. You can retest every 6 months, or reapply every 6 months. So my point was, I was like, well, if I'm going to reapply, I'm going to retest. why would I not?
Right.
You know, make the most of it. So I remember I get a call from him one afternoon, and he was like, "Hey, this is Lieutenant Schmuckatelli," and I'm like, "Hey, sir, how are you?" He's like, "Good." He's like, "I've got an idea," and I'm like, "I'm all ears." He was like, "Well, right now the Navy needs aviators faster than they can get them," and honest to God, the first thought that crossed my mind is, "Okay, well, I wish them luck." I hope they get them. It never crossed my mind. Never entered my mind. And I mean, no disrespect to anyone, because some of my best friends are aviators, and but it just wasn't. I think maybe that's the draw. Is like something's pulling me toward trying to out for special warfare, where other guys, the live and breathe, like, oh, if I don't make flight school, I don't know what I'll do. I'm like,
Right.
that was foreign to me. So I said, okay, how does that? He's like, well, hear me out. I said, again, send it. He was like, right now, there's a 6-month backlog from the date you get your commission until you start flight school. I said, okay. And he was like, I think what's happening is you're applying contingent upon acceptance. You're applying to OCS contingent upon acceptance to a follow-on program. He's like, I think what we ought to do is this. We applied to AOCS. OCS at the time was in Newport, Rhode Island. Had been there forever, very prestigious naval officer candidate school.
And officer candidate school.
Correct.
That's my question. Yep. I know the military, they love
Yep.
their acronyms.
Now, Pensacola had AOCS, Aviation Officer Candidate School. What's his name? Richard Gere made Officer and a Gentleman.
Okay.
That was based on Pensacola. But the Navy, they're like, we're not going to shut down training for a motion picture. You can use another naval base, and, where they, like, Puget Sound, Washington State, I think it was. There was never an OCS there. So but Marine Corps drill instructors, the climate, it was similar. I had no Deborah Winger in my time at AOCS. I did not. But that was what it was based on, right? So one thing and another, I'm like, I'm confused at this point. I'm glad I'm on the phone with him instead of in person, because he'd be like, not sure you're what we're looking for, son. Follow the dots. So said, okay, one thing and another. His plan was, he's like, you get accepted to AOCS. He's like, all you've got to do, you don't even have to take the physical again, because the physical you took for buds was harder.
Mm-hmm.
There was a swim, and the times were, the tolerances were, more stringent. So I was like, okay, great. And take the aviation aptitude portion of the written test. If you pass that, your scores are great. We'll send the application. We'll submit your application. He's like, and the logic is this. AOCS has a very high attrition rate. It's physically challenging, a very high attrition rate. Buds has the highest attrition rate in the Navy. AOCS at the time was like second in attrition. And he was like, you get through that, you've got 6 months until your flight school date. He's like, we have a big district here in Pittsburgh, so we can do what's called an Officer Hometown Recruiting Program. He's like, you'll come back here to help with the recruiting initiative. He's like, the day you get back, we submit a request for a designator change. He's like, now, you're applying as an officer, got a better chance of making it.
Yeah.
I was like, let's do it. So I go down, first available opportunity. I take the aviation aptitude test. I pass. I get my orders for Pensacola. Oh, wow. You know what? April 17th. Yeah, April 17th, 89. So it was about a week ago.
Yep.
Was my anniversary date. Wow. So all the guys I was in class 1889, Aviation Officer Candidate School, Pensacola, Florida. Happy anniversary, boys. But yeah, so I get there. I go through the program. And there were times, honest to God, I felt like a spy. I mean, there are guys like, man, if I couldn't fly, and I'm not making fun. It's just where your heart is, where your heart's bringing you. Man, if I couldn't fly, I don't know what I would do. And I'm like, me too, And I mean, I'm not, it is kind of funny, but it was a shame, because there were a lot of guys who got dropped from the program for things that were just out of their control. There was they had this thing too at the time, and I should say, Aviation Officer Candidate School is long gone. It no longer exists. The Navy, in a budget cut, assimilated all officer candidate programs to Newport. ROTC programs are Reserve Officer Training Corps while you're in college, right? So you do your military training along with your core curriculum, and AOCS is like, no, you've already gotten your degree. Now it's a condensed course, military training only to get you to the next phase, flight school, what have you. But at the time, and for a long, long time, one of the things that the Navy had was, it was called the NAVCAD program, the Naval Aviation Cadet Program, right? And one of the things that the NAVCADs used to always say, their little thing was twice the pilot, half the pay, right? Because your status, you had to have a certain amount of college credits to qualify for that program, but you didn't need a degree. You'd go through the program, we'd all go through together. On the date of graduation, we get our rank. They don't. They're still a cadet. Now we start flight training. So we're going through flight training as an ensign, or our counterparts in the Marine Corps would come to us from their commissioning source as second lieutenants, and would all go through flight training together, Navy and Marine Corps. And the NAVCADs would still be a naval aviation cadet. They were basically on, and this is, I'm laughing because it's funny, you had to be there, but they'd get half an ensign's pay until they got their wings. So the day they got their wings, now they get commissioned. Now they're an ensign, with all rank and pay and privilege. But one of the things that I'll never forget hearing was like, you'd always get like a nickname. It wasn't your call sign, but the senior candidates who ran your first like in-dock week, based on, I don't know, appearance or traits or personality, like you'd get Papagano. Papagano was mine because like Patrick Allen was, guess they figured it'd be rude to call me a Dago, Papagano. I'm like, yes, here, present, But a good friend of ours. And he was a kid compared to us. We were a little bit older. I'll never forget it. Jim was his first name. He was a NAVCAD. And one of the candidate officers said to him one evening, we're online, and he was like, Candidate Schmuckatelli, or NAVCAD Schmuckatelli, Candidate Schmuckatelli. Oh, you're here on the NAVCAD program. He's like, yes, sir. Well, how many college credits do you have? Why don't you just graduate? And in like a flustered, frustrated panic, the kid goes, this candidate does not know, sir. That's all the candidate officer had to hear. He's like, you don't know. You don't know how many college credits you have. Okay, poopy idiot NAVCAD. Just take my money. He's like, you probably have 3 degrees. You probably graduated years ago, and you're too stupid to know. You just keep writing them checks, But good guy, really, really good guy. And early on in the process, you're constantly going to NAMI, Naval Aviation Medical Indoctrination, I think, NAMI. And as you can imagine, oh man, the NAMI whammy. There's a lot of like, hey, something came up and your vision changed, right? You're out. In his case, he was able. It's called Valsalva. As a swimmer, you probably know, like when you pop your ears, right? Yeah. Well, if you can't do that as a diver or an aviator, you're fucked. Yeah. I mean, that's you will rupture, blow an eardrum, and it's a lot of guys were lost from the programs. Maybe it's just a bad day. Maybe it was a sinus infection or something. But at this particular day, Jim made it through his flight physical, made it to Pensacola, made it through the first NAMI exam that we all had when we got there. So was it a fluke? Was it, or the times that he was able to clear, was that the fluke? Who knows? But one day he's there, next day after medical. And that was another thing too, man. Later on I would know that sometimes it was referred to as the black helicopter. They're like, oh yeah, man, the black helicopter's landing. And basically what happens is like we go through a physical. Next thing you know, nobody sees Frame. Yeah. Well, where is he? Like literally. And you're not at liberty to be like, okay, I'll catch up with you later. Yeah. No, you're locked on and you're being marched to the next evolution or class or whatever. And, next thing you know, it's like, you're taken aside and they're like, hey, sorry, candidate, you're going to be processed. But they don't just throw you at the bus station. I mean, a couple candidate officers would go, clean out your gear, put it in your sea bag, and you'd be taken to another barracks with other folks awaiting, like, what's their next point in the process, like that. So, yeah, man, it was, but, here I am. And I tell you this, I made some dear friends there, wouldn't have traded that for anything, and I think, interestingly enough, like, you play the hand you're dealt, because once there's that much, and so the 6 months, backlog, right? I get my commission. I graduate on August 25th. I get my orders for flight school. And I'm like, all right, man, here we go. Because I'm going back home and I'm going to submit a designate. And I don't even know if that's possible, to be honest with you. Probably not. Knowing what I know now, I'd be like, okay, you wanted to do that? Well, I wanted to play Major League Baseball. So, So I get my orders. Well, like a lot of backlogs in the pipeline for training, sometimes they get worse. Then you get a longer delay. Okay. Other times they get better. So that log jam can move forward or backwards, right? I get my orders. August 25th, I get my commission. I start flight training on September 5th. I'm like, it's not a long time. Like, what happened to 6 months? What happened to a designator change? What happened to trying out for buds? Like, you're in it. Yep. So, okay. So, and I didn't tell very many people this story, but I get to my first, I'm still on Sherman Field, Pensacola Naval Air Station, right? So it's a Friday afternoon, and we haven't gone live yet. We haven't done even simulated instruction yet. I mean, we're new. We just got our in-briefing a couple days prior, right? So I'm like, okay. Commanding officer, I will never forget. I'm going to say this last name too, because who cares at this point in the game. Bill Hobgood, Commander Hobgood, right? He's a good guy. I have nothing against him. Good man. He's standing up there, welcoming us all aboard, and he says, gentlemen, he's like, one of the things you learn in the Navy is you play the hand you're dealt. And he said, I just want to make sure you all feel welcome and realize and know that I have an open door. Anything you ever want, anytime, pop in. He's like, if my door is open, you just want to say hi, just come on in. It's open. Check. So it's a Friday. And I already know that I'm headed to the officers club after dinner, because that's what we do. And back then, you could still have fun. Like, you could still have fun at the officers club without too many, I don't know. So I'm a little bit emboldened by the Friday afternoon adrenaline rush. And I'm like, you know what? In my logic, I thought was sound. I'm like, they haven't spent a dime on me yet. I haven't had a simulator. I haven't had a flight. If I'm going to make a break, it's got to be now. Super duper. So I walk down the hall. And his door's open. I turn into his outer office, and his secretary's there, very nice older lady. And I could hear him in his office with someone else. The door's slightly open. I could hear voices. And she was like, hey, can I help you? And I said, yes. I said, ma'am, I just was wondering if the skipper was available. And she was like, well, he's in there right now with someone else, but y'all can have a seat. And that's exactly how she talked, too. It's Pensacola, it's the South. So I sit down. And I know from the voices in the conversation, I know who's in there with him, because this was a guy that I graduated with. Similar story to my own, only he was a business major. He desperately wanted supply corps, and he felt that it would be a great place to get started and then work on his master's degree, achieve a master's degree with world experience. I mean, supply chain in the military is pretty impressive, as you can imagine, right? So now, like, I don't want to eavesdrop, but I'm like, I'm so excited. I'm like, yes, maybe he'll write both of us orders today, What an ass. I mean, I'm delusional at that age, right? So, but I do believe this. I do believe that God, takes charge sometimes when you're headed down the wrong path. Even if it's simple. Even if it's, I was out on my way to a date once, sidebar. I'm out on my way to a date, and she was just a horrible person. And, I had an auto accident. No, just made that shit up. I made that up completely. But you get what I'm saying, right? Like, I got a flat tire, never made it. Oh, yeah, that place was raided, and everybody went to jail. So, no, that didn't happen. But I do think there are times when it's kind of like, hey, I was there in that moment to save myself a blunder, right? Because there's no reset button, no matter what. Hey, no offense, but, let's just forget that ever happened. Bullshit. You're not going to forget it didn't happen. I hold a grudge about guys I had a beef with in Little League. You know what I mean? And you know who you are. I wasn't out. But anyway, yeah, so I'm sitting there and I'm like, here we go. And I kid you not, I hear the skipper's voice clear as a bell. And he says, well, Sam, I'm sorry you feel that way, but let me tell you how it is. And I'm like, oh God, get small and get out the door, right? He says, with no ifs, ands, or buts, he's like, right now the Navy needs aviators. And he was like, you are here on an aviation contract. If you do not wish to be an aviator, you can separate from active duty and we'll have you out of here by Monday. Like out of here and you're going home. And I'm like, there's a publication in the Navy. It's called the All Hands Magazine. I think it's Navy and Marine Corps, but the All Hands Magazine, right? And I pick it up and I'm leafing through it. So I hear this and I go, I set it on the coffee table in front of me. I get up and you always get up and check your tuck, right? So I get up, I check my shirt tuck, and now this sweet older woman at the desk here, she's like doing her thing, whatever, and I'm thinking I'm a ninja. I'm just gonna slide the doors right here, right? So I get up and I turn, and she goes, "Oh, he won't be much longer." And I'm like, and as I turn to say, "Oh, that's okay," as I turn to say something, the door opens further. Sam comes out. The skipper's got his hand on his shoulder. He goes, okay, Sam. He's like, I appreciate you coming to see me. So Sam's not pleased, but he's not, he's got bearing. He's a good dude. So he walks past me and he goes, Mike, and I'm like, hey, Sam, Now I'm standing there like a deer in the headlights. And the skipper looks at me and he goes, and how can I help you? And, of course, now the secretary's like, oh, this young man just wanted to see you. And he's like, well, come on in. And I'm like, so I walk in, I sit down, he walks around, sits down at his desk. He's like, well, what can I help you with? And I was like, sir, I said, I'm really sorry. I didn't know you had somebody in your office. And I said, I was just on my way out, just on my way home. And I said, saw your door was open, remembered you said, hey, if you see the door open, come on in and say hi. Honest to God, I was like, just wanted to come in and say, glad to be here. Look forward to it. I said, this is awesome. And he looks right, he goes, well, I can't tell you how glad I am to hear you say that. And he didn't, I will give him credit for this. And to this day, that's why I said his last name. To this day, I still hold to this. He didn't talk trash. He didn't say a word about why Sam was in there at all. Didn't even make the assumption that I overheard it. But what he did was he kind of shared with me, like, I can't tell you how glad I am to hear you say that. And then he kind of sits back and he's like, again, play the hand you're dealt. He's like, you don't always get what you want. And he said, and you're going to see that in aviation. He said, you start in primary, we all start in the same aircraft. And then you go to intermediate and we all start in the same aircraft. Then you go to advanced. And he's like, but as the pipeline, the further down you go, separations are made. Like, well, no, that's not entirely true. You go through basic. At the end of basic, that's where they make the first separation, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and that's due to who's going to go rotary wing, like helicopters, and then who's going to go fixed wing. So that's your first split, right? And in each one of those, I mean, my God, at the time, the Navy used helicopters for mine sweeping. They used helicopters for search and rescue. I mean, for a lot of different things. Fixed wing is everything that's not helos. So from transport to airborne early warning to, and now the fighter attack role has been assumed by the FNA-18 Hornet. But back then, the Tomcats and the Intruders, a fighter and a bomber, and so it just kept going, and so many different, so many choices. But
how old were you in this?
I was like 24, 25.
Okay.
And looking back, we were a little bit older.
Right.
We were a little bit older because we didn't go right out of college. I had some classmates at AOCS who did come right out of college, so they're like 22. And I remember a friend of mine telling me this once. He goes, man, we shouldn't even be driving. You understand that? He's like, some of us are idiots. Like, you drive and again, too, you look out in a parking lot at any flight school. I guess the Air Force is the same. I don't know. But you look out at any of the parking lots I mean, all you see are fast cars and motorcycles, And I'm like, because we don't have enough risk, right? Looking back, I should have just had like, I don't know, like a bubble mobile or something, a little pedibike or
It's
something.
always a scary thought, though. Tanks, aircraft. You're thinking like, man, there's a 23-year-old, some young kid
Huh?
who, yeah.
But I also think this though. I think that with that age or lack of it, also comes like that sense of invincibility, where you're kind of like, no, well, how'd you do that? Well, you just didn't know any better. You didn't know that it's unlikely,
Yeah.
or like,
Right.
okay. But I will say this, looking back, like what if, and I didn't get my first choice, and high attrition rate. I mean, guys far smarter and more fit than me, ring out of buds. I'd like to think that I would have never quit. The guys that I knew who went and didn't make it, none of them quit. Not one of them. It was unavoidable. One of our buddies from the CrossFit community, I don't remember how many times, what the maximum amount of times you could be taken out of an evolution due to like severe hypothermia. And it wasn't, I mean, there's one thing like, oh, I'm cold. As a swimmer, you're like, oh, I'm cold. You're cold, but you're not hypothermic. You're cold, but you're not like about to black out.
Exactly.
And again, I mean, different tolerances, Another one of our friends had, well, like I said, Matt, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. They're like, he's either got a severe lower abdominal tear, and in that case, I will say this, and I've had my shoulder to this day is completely fucked because of a Navy doctor who probably should have been on a golf course instead of in an exam room. Well, how's that feel? I'm like, how's it feel? Well, you tell me I can't, I can't hold it up. Can I raise my arm? And he asked me, can I raise my arm? And I'm like, yep. Like here, right? Oh, here, 800 milligrams of Motrin and some kind of, I don't know, potent like painkiller. So an anti-inflammatory, a painkiller, writes me a light duty chit. I get rolled out of my class and I have to wait till the class behind me gets up to where I was and hope my shoulder's healed by then. That was it. Come back and see me when you feel better. I can still see him. He looked like a little pimp in a Navy uniform. He really did. He's got like a big gold watch, his big gold like chain link, like gold ID bracelet. I swear to God, he looked like a B movie actor. He's like real slick hair. He's like, well, come back and see me when you feel better. I'm like, listen, doc, I'm into that age. I'm gonna lunge across the table and choke you with my left arm. You know what I mean? But he's kind of a douche. But point being, with Matt, I mean, that was heartbreaking because, but now I say that on the one hand, then I've seen some flight surgeons in the community that are outstanding, some Navy corpsmen who are like, if you get hurt, go see doc because whatever's wrong with you, he'll fix it.
Right.
So I mean, it's just luck of the draw, I guess at that time. But looking back, I would not have traded that for anything. I mean, it was to be able to say, well, I didn't get my first choice. Oh, that's too bad. What were you like ship's company or No, I was a naval aviator. I flew A6 Intruders, which was decommissioned. I was a Vietnam era aircraft, but it was a hell of a ride. And I met some really good dudes.
And when you knew you were going to be an aviator, did you know what planes you were? Did you have a plane in mind?
No,
Were you really,
no,
you
yes,
were so
it was
focused
Buzz.
on Buzz
I was like, yeah, whatever they're gonna, whatever we're jumping out of,
Right.
Yeah. But what was again was timing, right? Was timing. So fast forward about like 93. We get word one day, and the Intruder was already on the chopping block. It was decommissioning faster than originally anticipated. But there was also a aircraft in design that was supposed to replace it. I want to say it was Grumman. I think it was the A12 Avenger. I think it was. But anyway, it looked like all the mock-ups that we had seen looked like a Dorito. It just looked like this, and come to find out, it was probably one of the biggest farces ever perpetrated on the American public. Because it wasn't even the updates that they were showing to the Navy brass were falsified, and they were so far behind in production. They just kept pushing further back. Finally, the Navy was like, all right, you know what? We're decommissioning the Intruders a lot faster than we thought. We'll have the Hornet replace it as the fighter attack or the attack platform, Shortly after that, the Tomcats were phased out, and then the Hornet just took the dual role. And as they're working on other platforms, I've been so removed from the naval aviation community for so long. But what I remember vividly was this: I had a really good rapport with my commanding officer. I mean, he was a good guy. And because he was such a good guy, Dan Franken was his name, and he and I got along very well. I was fortunate to fly with him a few times as a two-man aircraft. And I remember going to see him one day, and I was like, man, I'm doing it. This is now, right? Again, divine intervention. God's got the path for you, right? So I go to see him, and I'm like, Skipper, I got to run something by you. He's like, yeah, what's on your mind? And I said, I know how busy you are trying to find communities for us to go to. Same thing. You pick the top three. What you're not going to be an intruder anymore. What do you want? So you'd pick choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. So I hadn't handed mine in yet. And I went to see him, and I was like, listen, before you think this is a joke, I wanted to talk to you about my selection. He's like, yeah, what's on your mind? And I said, sir, I'd never told very many people this, but I said, the only reason I chose the Navy in the first place was I wanted to be a SEAL. And I said, now my understanding is, a lot of the guys come from surface warfare, but I mean, what do you learn in surface warfare? You learn navigation, you learn engineering. Well, in aviation, we learn navigation, engineering. I mean, got a warfare specialty, unrestricted line officer. I mean, what's the difference, right? He was like, huh. He's like, He's like, yeah. He goes, okay, all right. He's like, how can I help? And I was like, well, I know there's a selection process, and I'd have to go before a board, and so if with your endorsement, we can get it started. So he did. He gave me the endorsement. Then he sent me down to operations because our operations officer had a friend up at Little Creek. Like, right on. Well, his friend was in he was his counterpart in operations, but it wasn't special warfare. It was special operations. He was at EOD Mobile Unit 2, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, Mobile Unit 2. I was like, right on. So my last year of active duty, I got to spend up there. I was on temporary orders assigned to that community with the plan that as soon as there's a vacancy, I would slide in, I would be part of the community, do a designator change, and then I would have, and usually what happens is you get the designator first, and you go to in that case, I would have gone to EOD Tech School, learned all the, technical sophistication of explosive ordnance, right? Dive school, jump school in whatever order that would have happened based on availability. And then you get assigned to a detachment at the mobile unit. Then you start all your in-house training. Well, what they did with me was they reversed it. And they were like, okay, you're going to be assigned to this detachment. Whatever the training cadre has lined up, get on it, get on the roster. So my first week at Little Creek with the mobile unit, we're at the tower one day, we're doing fast rope and rappel. The next day, we're at LZ Green, landing zone green on Little Creek. And Little Creek's right between Norfolk and Oceana, where I was stationed. So it was like, I lived in the same house, just drove a couple more minutes up the beach, But yeah, first week I'm rappelling off the tower, fast roping off the tower. The next day, we're coming out of a helicopter. I'm like, dude, this is cool. Like, this is cool. It was a great ride. It was a great experience. I wouldn't have traded it for the world. Met some really, really good guys there too. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is it coincides with the height of the Clinton administration's budget cuts. So now I don't have a designator that's critical anymore. I didn't lose your wings because you transitioned, but instead of being like say like a 1325 was a naval flight officer, I was a 1305 now, a general aviation officer. So it's like, you're in the aviation community, but you don't have a squadron, you don't have a plane, right? So that was one of the communities that was on the chopping block. And I was able to dodge that bullet a couple times and get an extension until the board convened to make their decision. And then just like time ran out. I guess what they were looking at from the detailer's end was like on the big whiteboard. It's like, okay, this is when the board convenes, but there are no fiscal vacancies for the next like 1 or 2 fiscal years at the time. Yeah, so I separated from active duty in '93. Affiliated with a reserve unit, and did that. But then I went to work for a private security company and did a lot of traveling, executive protection, and that made it, because again, like nowadays, with online courses and things like that, it would work. But back then, you kind of had to be in person, or you could do like mail-in correspondence courses. So that just fell by the wayside after a couple longer assignments, longer projects, and that was it. So I stayed with that company for a few years, and then 9/11 happened. I was working for them I was in Northern Virginia, the D.C. area. I was on an assignment there on September 11th. I woke up the next morning. We'd been out with a client. He was kind of a dick, but we were out with him all night, right? And so we get back to our apartment complex, and I dropped him off at his house in McLean, I think he lived. We drive back. I go to sleep. I'm like, you know what? It's a long night. We've been going too long. I turned off my phone. I'm like, he's not going to be up until this afternoon, so I'm sleeping. Woke up. I remember this like it was yesterday. It was so wild. I got up, came out of the bedroom, walked into the kitchen, started the coffee, and back then we had these like little Motorola, I think they were called the Motorola Razr. It was like a little flip phone, So I picked that up, I flip it open, and I had all these missed calls from home. And I'm like, oh my God, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Like Alexandra was born already. She's a baby. And, Jen's home with her and everything. And I'm like, oh my God, something happened at home. Something happened at home, either my daughter or, parents, something like that. So, simultaneously, like I'd grab a coffee, I'd get the phone, I sit down on the sofa in front of the television, and all at the same time. Take a sip of my coffee, set it down, phone's ringing, I turn the TV on right as Jen answers. And she's like, oh my God, where are you? And I'm like, oh. It's like unreal. Like literally, I'm watching this happen. I'm like, is everybody okay? She goes, are you okay? I've been calling you for hours. What's going on? And I explained it to her. But I remember I ended up getting off the phone with her. I was like, I have to call you back. And the first call I made was back to the Pittsburgh recruiting office because I didn't know who else to call. And, I identified myself and I said, hey, I came through there, a few years back. For aviation officer, aviation programs, officer programs. And I said, how fast can you get me back in? And he's like, well, sir, give me your social and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I was like, all right, thank you. And that was my decision. Like that was, that was there was no other way. Like that's where I was going. And again, divine intervention, right? Within before they got back to me, and they got back to me in the next day or so, before they got back to me, a friend of mine from the company that I had been working with, he had already moved on to government service. So he contacts me and he is like, hey, how you, everybody's checking in on everybody. How are you? This and this. And I'll never forget. He was like, you know what, we're looking for people. He's like, there's a project about to launch in Israel. And he said, there's two teams that are already there, but they need two more. And he was like, are you interested? Would you like to come to work with us? And I was like, yeah, I would. And so that was that, And in hindsight, what was really interesting was, I wanted to go back to the Navy because that's where I came from. But in a status like I had, it's like, well, where, you're not an aviator anymore. And if you were, too bad, because that aircraft is no longer around, But as it turned out, I made the right decision because it was just an incredible experience, right. So that's how I ended up in government.
So how long were you in the military for? When you were in the Navy for?
I was only active duty for 4 years.
Okay.
And then, I just found my reserve discharge. When I moved some stuff around here, I found all these old folders. I think it was another 10 in the inactive IRR, inactive ready reserve. So they have the option to recall you if need be, but didn't.
And you did that, and so when you were IR, you were also doing the private security.
Correct. Yeah, and that's why it was the inactive side, because I think because of, if I remember it correctly, it's been a minute, but I think because of the aviation specialty, they have the prerogative to recall you for a window of like 10 years after discharge, right? Now, my status was a little bit odd because, when I affiliated with them, I'll tell you this, if they had called me back and said, hey, you had temporary orders to, EOD mobile unit would like you back for that, I would have gone. not knowing that the other side, that the contracting, the government side would have been an option. I would have gone had that offer been dropped, because leaving that community, that was awesome. I mean, I really felt at home there, but no, that's just how it worked out.
Okay. Now, I'm curious, were there now, I mean, without getting you, I know you like to, you're a talkative individual. But
Loquacious.
Loquacious, yes. Exactly.
That means talkative. Well, no shit, Frank. I know what it means.
Did you have any interesting, I mean, I know I'm sure you had interesting stories, but were there any crazy stories when you were doing private security, or was that more benign than...
You know what? It was interesting. It really was interesting because some of it was very, very like, you realize you're there as a preemptive measure, and oftentimes, and I think that was the thing too, we would lose a lot of guys, younger guys, just with maybe a lack of maturity. I was really, really fortunate because when I went to work for that company, there was a gentleman, and again, I violated this rule 3 times so far. Well, twice with my commanding officers. This other gentleman, Clive Guest was his name, right? He's a English gentleman, former Royal Marine, and then he was in their SBS, Special Boat Squadrons. And just a really, like a gentleman through and through, And I was very, very fortunate that on like my first assignment, I met him. And very cool, very, very composed. And the kind of guy that was perfect for that line of work. And then probably what made him a great commando was like if you look across a room in any environment, he would blend right in. I mean, he knew the dress. He knew for where you were supposed to be on time, dressed to blend, like the gray man. Like you wouldn't even see him coming, but very, very capable. And it's one of the things that he kind of took me under his wing and just really brought me along, as a mentor. And I'll never forget that because I think sometimes, you get guys in there who are like, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. I'm like, what part of this is bullshit? This is the assignment you drew. 1, you have no experience. And I know you're a badass and you taught Steven Seagal how to fight and all that other shit. But the truth of it is, this is an entry-level position. And oftentimes in executive protection, entry-level position is like, well, I'll tell you, my first assignment was for the Saudi royal family at the time. And there was a matriarch of the family who had an organ transplant, and she was in Paradise Valley, Arizona, recovering. So the whole family, extended family, and all their entourage moved into this enclave. And what the hell? It was Paradise Valley. I don't know that the community itself had a name separate from that where it was located, but like each corner in this big 4-square grid, each corner had a cul-de-sac. So you would enter the plan here, and I'll never forget this. The actress Daryl Hannah lived like right here. Used to harass me all the time. I don't want to get into it. My wife might see this. No, I never saw her.
Pretend I know who that is.
Oh my God, you Daryl Hannah! Oh, listen, in the '80s, she was hot, but then so was I. So, '80s were a great decade. No, but so that was like So she lived there, right? For what? I don't even know why that's relevant. But Stevie Nicks lived nearby too. Now, you know who Stevie Nicks is? Legendary, right? But so it was very, very like a suburb of what would be like Phoenix would have been probably the major city nearby. Phoenix, Scottsdale, Paradise Valley was this little very, very affluent community. So you'd enter the plan, make a right, straight down the next corner, the cul-de-sac there. We had 3 estates there, like on the cul-de-sac. And I remember like it was yesterday. Gold was the big one, and that's where like the former queen lived. Right? She had a full medical staff, 24/7 security, medical. The house next to it was Ruby. That's where the staff lived. The house across the cul-de-sac was Diamond. That's where her daughter stayed. She was in town most of the time. Down the block to the next cul-de-sac, Silver and Bronze. Usually those were empty. When the other sons would come into town, one lived at Bronze, one lived at Silver, right? My first assignment was at Gold as part of I don't know how many person, security element. And literally, you would stand in the yard somewhere, and every hour, you would come around the corner and you would push me to the next post, and I would get there, and then that person would move to the next, and literally, like, tick, 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 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. for like, I don't know what, like 60, 90, 120 days. It was like Sears School with no beatings. It was horrible, but the money wasn't bad, and that's like paying your dues. How I met Clive was he had just come off of a detail, more active, and this was something like, hey, this is what we've got right now. Do you want it? We could use you. Sure. So a guy like that coming off something that was faster paced, slides into an opening, kind of just relaxes for a little bit, right? But I think that was the thing, because he was like, Mike, you get it. He's like, this is not glamorous. And he was like, but it's the guys that will complain, they don't recognize my talent. I'm like, and what talent do you think you have that these other guys who went through the same train up, by the way, but it was 90% of the time was boring as all get out. But at the same time, you realize that, a case like that, it's possibility of a problem, not probability. Other times we would do like work celebrities, other times corporate executives, that type of thing. And, every once in a while it would be interesting. Other times it would be, and I guess too, one of the things that we learned fast, I learned this from Clive, he's like, there's really no measure for what we stopped from happening. Right? I mean, if you're doing your job properly and you're being surveilled by a good opposition, they're going to look for the telltale signs. They're going to now, conversely, you get these guys who are like, this is bullshit, man. This is bullshit. I can't tell you how many guys got bounced for like, they'd find a little nook and cranny corner of their post and they'd like prop themselves up and go to sleep like nobody's going to find them. It always get caught every time, and they get bounced, and then, it's just silly. But, it at times it could be boring. At other times, we went to a corporate executive in Decatur, Illinois, of all things. I'll never forget this. Archer Daniels Midland was the corporation. And their big thing, you learn some weird, obscure stuff. Their big thing is soybeans and everything you can produce from soybeans, right? Ink for newspapers, for example. I didn't know. What I did know was this. We flew into Chicago, got a commuter from Chicago to a little puddle jumper from Chicago to Decatur. We landed. The doors of the aircraft opened. I stepped outside. It was a warm day. I never smelled anything so bad in my life. Evidently, that little municipal airport is close to the fields where they dry like the mash when they process soybeans. They'll mash them into like whatever, and they're just soybean fields, not where they grow them, but where this like byproduct. I don't even know the process. It was horrible. It was horrible. I smelled bathrooms in municipal buildings in Afghanistan better than that. And that stuff could knock a buzzard off a shit wagon, So, yeah, bad. But we're supposed to be there for a shareholders meeting, right? And the smell, you get used to it. It goes away after a while. But we're supposed to be there for literally a couple days for a shareholders meeting in case, people get unruly, because there was some controversy going on at the time with the allegations of price fixing between ADM and their Japanese counterparts, right? So it was my first exposure to like corporate espionage, And I'll tell you, fun fact, what's his name? Jason Bourne. There's a movie, what the hell's it called? The Insider? But there was a movie made about this. Honest to God, right? I'm not in it. But there was a movie made about this, and it was like, yeah, there was a guy in the ranks of ADM who fancied himself. Do you remember? You're probably too young to remember this. It was in every shopping mall. And then when the internet came along, they had the spy store. It was called the spy store. Yeah. Not like, well, picture like the Sharper Image, only like worse. No, and that's not fair. Sharper Image is actually kind of cool. The
the spy store was literally that. Like, oh, see this pen?
Right.
What's a camera? You know? Oh, see these sunglasses? Oh, I can. Oh. Well, this guy was like that, you know? And I guess he approached the FBI and he's like, oh, I got information. And he's thinking he's some super, you know, secret agent. But yeah, there was a movie made about it. And, you know, I mean, I know firsthand, you know, working close with the family, they're nice folks. They really were nice. But the point being, that 2 or 3 day shareholders meeting, we were there for over a year. Like over a year. And I'm like, holy smokes. Like, talk about like being part of the community, you know? But yeah. And as jobs like that go, hey, you're only going to be here for a couple weeks or a couple days. Hey, can you extend? Hey, can you extend? Hey, can you extend? So we extended. And then Clive was our team leader on that project. And we're like, man, this is going long term. He gets called into a meeting. And as I recall, they're like, yep, you know, no end in sight. How's everybody doing? All the guys seem to be okay. Yeah, super duper. Within 24 hours, they call him back. Clive, it was right before the 4th of July. I'll never forget that. Right before, they call him back in. They're like, how fast can the guys be out of here? Like, we, you know, change of mind. You know, the board's decided, you know, we got to go. Roger that. So next thing you know, we stand everything down. We pack everything up. We take it to the post office, ship it home. And I had actually bought, this was kind of funny, while I was there, Jennifer and I are planning our wedding, you know, and she's, oh my God, I love her. That woman's got the patience of a saint, I will tell you that. I bought, for shits and giggles, a 1968 Corvette convertible. Yeah. So we packed everything up, shipped it all home. I got in that bad boy and drove it home, you know, and she's like, what the hell is wrong with you, you know? And I'm like, oh, for starters, I'd say a lot. But, well, looking at the clock, this is going to take an extra episode, I think.
At least, yeah.
So why don't we'll put a pin in it now. We'll get on downstairs and get some work done, get some training done. But
Good.
All right, man. Hope we covered. Hope I answered your questions well so far.
We got through one.
All right, my friend. What are we talking? Oh my! 1 hour, 2 minutes, 20 seconds. This is going to take a couple more episodes, right? A couple more. All right, my friend. Well, more to follow. All right. Cool.
Sounds good.
All right, we're out.